It's that time of year. It's the Locked On NFL Mock Draft Special. Our hosts decide for all 32 teams who their next cornerstone player will be. Who will reach? Who will fall? Find out now.
Here we are, episode 5 of the 2025 Locked On NFL Mock Draft Special. The most comprehensive mock draft you'll find is even bigger again this year. 7-episode series will take you through the entire first round of the NFL draft. We're almost there. There's some trade talks happening, unparalleled insight from all 32 of the teams here at the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We've got the draft dudes, Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino of Locked On NFL Scouting, and fantasy insight from our Locked On Fantasy experts, as well as some other experts, insiders here on the network. It's so much fun. And the final episode will be an NFL squad reaction to the mock draft, providing insight and maybe some insults from a group of our Locked On NFL local experts on this year's selections. Of course, we are your hosts. I am Brian Peacock, NFL analyst and co-host of the Peacock and Williamson NFL show and the Locked On 49ers podcast. Here with me are my co-host, former NFL scout Matt Williamson, and my guys Keith Sanchez and Damian Parson from the outstanding Locked On NFL Draft podcast. And we are on to pick 23 now in the first round of the NFL mock draft. And that is the Green Bay Packers and Peter Bukowski, who is standing by here with the 23rd selection of Locked On Packers. And to be honest, guys, the Green Bay Packers are probably one of the most well-built teams in the NFL, because anytime you do a mock draft, anytime you're trying to project what the Green Bay Packers are going to do, there's not any gaping problems on the roster. There's not any huge holes, which are the most obvious to fill, which obviously makes the job a little bit more difficult when you're trying to mock draft. Is it a best player available sort of a situation? Do you guys see, we'll go to you, Damian, do you see something with the Green Bay Packers that needs to be addressed immediately for this football team in the first round?
I'll probably look at corner. There's been rumblings of potentially trading Jair Alexander, their number one corner, and things like that. They got a lot of young guys behind them, but being able to go get, even if you kept Jair for another year, right? Like, I still would go and grab one of these big, because they're a team that typically is kind of RAS, the height, weight, speed, arm length, the Azariah Thomas, the Thomases of the world, the Trey Amos out of Ole Miss, those big physical long arm corners, the guys that have the athletic profile. I think that would be a nice fit in this Jeff Hafley defense to pair either with Jair and become the guy when Jair leaves, or to replace Jair if they were able to execute a trade maybe on draft day.
Matt, taking a look at this roster, is it a situation where maybe you start to get ahead of it? Because as you know, we always expect all of these guys are going to hit and be exactly what we expect them to be on day one. Sometimes it takes some time to develop. Do you look at next year's free agent class and get a year ahead, like Damian was talking about with Jair Alexander? And I do know that Brian Gutekunst and the Green Bay Packers really love their height, weight, speed guys.
Yeah, and this is a good roster, and I don't see glaring holes. Now, they picked 23rd. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to find this guy with the 23rd pick in this particular draft. But I think the biggest need is massive impact players. Like, where's the Micah Parsons or the Justin Jefferson? When the going gets tough on either side of the ball, where's the superstar at any position? They have a lot of good. They got a lot of Bs. I need an A. I'm not sure where you find it. It'd be great if it was an edge rusher or a shutdown corner or a big-time receiver. But that probably isn't in the making. But BP, we go over the draft ditty stuff on our show. Other than last year's pick, an offensive lineman, and Jordan Love, their first-round pick is almost always a defensive player. I mean, it's like money in the bank.
Keith, let me throw a dark horse pick at you for the Green Bay Packers. And that is a guy that Jeff Hafley is familiar with from Boston College, and an edge rusher that potentially could add a little speed dimension off the edge in Donovan Ezeraku. Could that be a selection for the Packers here? Is he a first-round guy for you?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I actually talked with Peter Bukowski about that when I was on Locked On Packers, and I actually said that this makes so much sense, right? Just getting, former head coach, getting his guy back in the building. And also the Packers have been one of those teams that while they intake the RAS score stuff, right? Sometimes that puts you in position to draft guys that haven't been proven, right? You draft Lucas Van Ness, and he was not a proven sack guy, but you get that other guy in Donovan Ezeraku, who's a proven get home guy. And I think you draft him and you you identified the floor, but you also realize that there's tremendous upside with him. I think this would be a home run pick for the Packers.
Let's find out. Peter Bukowski ready to go with the 23rd selection for Locked On Packers in the 2025 NFL Mock Draft Special.
With the 23rd pick in the 2025 Locked On NFL Mock Draft, the Green Bay Packers select Derrick Harmon, defensive tackle from Oregon. Green Bay needs a dude to add to their pass rush. Derrick Harmon is a Michigan State transfer, came into Oregon and produced, led the nation in pressures last year, one of the best in Pro Football Focus's true pass rush situation, win rates, pressures, all those in true pass sets. He is someone who could be the long-term replacement for Kenny Clark. The Packers may not have Kenny Clark on the roster in 2026. He gets very expensive. Their roster is very expensive next year. Former first-round pick Devontae Wyatt, who's been a terrific spot pass rusher for Green Bay, he may not be on the roster with that fifth-year option looming that Green Bay is going to have to decide on. So if they're going to take a pass rusher in this spot, someone like Harmon, major conference pedigree, ran that sub 5-second 40 at 313 pounds, and bona fide pass rush productivity, it makes perfect sense for Green Bay.
Derrick Harmon, he's got traits. He's got height, weight, speed. Love the athleticism he showed off at the combine. He's got some production. Keith, what about the consistency? Because I see some times where, he's kind of out of the play. Sometimes he's all over the play. Kind of hit or miss for me, which was really hard for me to kind of put where I want him in the draft, because some people say, man, he's a top 15 pick. And sometimes you see it. And some people say, he's actually kind of a second round pick. And I kind of see that too.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't do a good enough job when I was on with Peter to convince him about Donovan, right? I didn't do a good enough job because he still went with Harmon. But BP, I agree with you, man. I agree with you that it's hit and miss with Derrick Harmon, right? And I think what this selection does is about putting pressure on Devontae Wyatt, right? Like, who are you going to be for us? Because he was one of those surprise first round picks that I think, picked up steam very late in the process to being a first rounder, because I think he was in the same draft class with Jordan Davis. So maybe what they're able to do is they're able to complement each other, right? Like, if you put 250% together, you get 100% type of situation. And maybe that's the thought process. I love the flashes with Derrick Harmon, but I do agree with you that there are times where you're wishing that you had a little bit more.
I would think interior pass rush should be a nice boost, though, right from day one. Third and 8, playing with leads, try to close teams out. Clark and Wyatt have not been great interior pass rushers. Clark's a good player, but yeah.
And to Matt's point, when you look at the numbers for Derrick Harmon, he has a 17.6 pass rush win rate. But when you go to true dropback sets, it jumps to 27%. Like, he gets after the quarterback. He accounted for 43 pressures in 2024. That's from an interior defensive lineman that's north of 315 pounds. Being able to inject that to this defensive line, you got to get after Caleb. We know what Jared Goff looks like when you start getting pressure onto him. Like, you have to be able to get to these guys. J.J. McCarthy's going to be a first-year starter next year. I don't think he wants to see big Derrick Harmon in his face time and time again in the fourth quarter. He's going to have to be consistent to you guys' point, but that pass rush upside and the productivity is something that just screams to you when you look at the stat sheet.
It kind of sounds like Chris Jones, who's kind of compares pretty favorably, right? With height, weight, speed, and the style of player they are with that size. And Chris Jones, the guy was like, okay, here's a true pass rush that we need, and he finds a way to get home. So who knows? Maybe Derrick Harmon, the next Chris Jones in the NFL. We're moving on here now to the Minnesota Vikings, who are, I know, a team that has talked about some trades, and there have been a lot of trade calls. Not a lot of trades have been consummated. In fact, none so far in this mock draft. And that might be pretty telling about what is going to happen in the real things. I just think there's a lack of players that people are trying to move up for. So we'll see if it's a stick and pick for Luke Braun and Locked On Vikings, who are now on the clock. Man, Matt, when you look at the Minnesota Vikings here, what is the big need and what do they need to accomplish in the first round of this draft?
One thing I think they really need that they've been very short on this year and the last couple of years is day 2 picks. They don't make any picks on the second day of the draft. I mean, I would be very open to moving out of this spot if I were them. I don't see one player on the board that I just have to have. I don't know if anyone's calling them, but I would love to move back if I were in their shoes. Not only did they trade up for McCarthy, but they traded up for the edge rusher too, Turner. So, I mean, that's it's paying off. Now, they went and got the Colts center and Colts guard. And so I think the O-line's basically complete. I think the offense is basically complete. But I would love to get Flores more movable chess pieces. I mean, we know he puts a lot of stress on his corners. A corner would make sense here. But I love the idea of one of the two top safeties learning from Harrison Smith. I mean, what a perfect mentor to hand the baton over to.
Yeah, I like that a lot, Matt. And I just wanted to jump in real quick, BP. I think the safeties is where this potentially lands. And you look at this secondary, Minnesota, and I always say this on the pod with DP, right? I'm like, they're one of those teams that it seems like they're always drafting a corner and they still always need corners and DPs, right? And Harrison Smith is getting older. I think a couple of years ago, they tried to draft Lewis Sign right out of Georgia, another Georgia pick. And I think just due to injuries and potentially playing out of position, it just hasn't worked out. So maybe you go back to another Georgia safety again and get the number one safety on the board to pair with Harrison Smith.
They lost. I felt like the Vikings and the Colts did a swap. The Vikings took the interior offensive lineman from the Colts. If I remember correctly, the Colts took their safety, Cam Bynum, and added him to their secondary. They definitely need to add a safety because Harrison Smith is a guy that's getting older. But then beside him, your other star guy that was there, he left in free agency.
Let's find out. The pick is in. The Minnesota Vikings with pick number 24, Luke Braun with the selection. Is it a defensive back for Locked On Vikings?
With the 24th pick in the Locked On NFL mock draft, the Minnesota Vikings select Malaki Starks, the safety out of Georgia. You might think it's a little weird that I'm taking a safety here. Harrison Smith just came back. They love Josh Metellus. They've got Theo Jackson. They even like him a little bit too. But Harrison Smith's 36. He'll be 37 for most of next year. And they just lost Cam Bynum. Safety is a pretty strong need for them in the long term. And Malaki Starks will get maybe a little bit of time to develop in a way that the last Georgia safety they took didn't really get that because of his injury. We can kind of try to re-roll that, but Malaki Starks to me is a great replacement for what Cam Bynum did for the Minnesota Vikings. A little bit more of a cover safety to me than he is like a hard-hitting trigger downhill. I don't love the way he triggers downhill, but he's heady, he's smart, he knows what he's looking at, he knows how to diagnose route coverages, especially when he's in quarters, which I think the Vikings would love to make a little bit better use of their quarters packages. So I think not only does he fit what the Vikings do in terms of his ability to play, all over the field. He's not just like a pure center fielder or anything like that, but also maybe helps them a little bit more in man coverage situations and is able to sort of bring up the versatility of their coverages in a way that they're really going to miss if they didn't have Cam Bynum in the building.
It is Georgia safety Malaki Starks. Malaki Starks' stock seems to be falling a little bit. He was the no doubt top safety in this draft coming into the process and was thought to be maybe even a top 15 pick. He's got athleticism. He's got range. He can cover. Is it prospect fatigue? What's going on here with Malaki Starks? Damian, did you see a reason why Starks isn't really as highly thought of as he has been? And could he even play could they even get the best of both worlds and maybe use him as a corner as well? Because Duke could cover.
Yeah, I think, coming into this draft cycle off of 2024, he was in the nickel a little bit more than we've seen them previous years. Georgia's secondary wasn't star-studded as they typically have been. So he was kind of moved into a position we really don't see him in, but he played well in the nickel. So I think, to your point, you can get a 2-for-1 special with Malaki Starks. You can get a nickel corner if you need it, but you also have a guy on the back end that can – I think Keith make this phrase popular on the show, make wrong things right. Like if you got corners that got beat over the top, he's got the range, the instincts, and the ball skills to go over the beat over the top and make that quarterback pay for that play that they made. So I think for him, for this pick with Brian Flores calling the defense, I love this because Brian Flores is going to find ways to move this young man around and create all the different type of headache scenarios for quarterbacks.
Matt, his job description is in his name of his position, right? Safety's got to help you be safe on the back end. So I got no problems with guys that are not making as many flash plays if you can just count on them. And I think that's kind of where Malaki Starks, the prospect, puts you to sleep compared to someone like Nick Emmanwori, who is still available, but it sounds like teams might be split on them, or maybe even some teams like Nick Emmanwori more. How do you like this fit for the Minnesota Vikings?
I do. We know that Flores is ultra aggressive and loves to bring the house and vary things. just having a goalie on the back end to kind of allow everyone in front of them to do their thing and just be assignment sound, get everyone aligned, take proper angles, I think has a lot of value in this particular defense.
The Houston Texans are on the clock. C.J. Stroud could use a new weapon, but the Texans could look to build their defense under head coach DeMeco Ryans. We'll see who the Texans take next in the 2025 Locked On NFL Mock Draft Special. This episode of the Locked On NFL Mock Draft Special is brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Gametime, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Even when demand is sky high, prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. And I've used Gametime so many times for football games, baseball games, concerts, comedy shows, theater events, fantastic last-minute deals. Save up to 60%, and the all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout, which is my favorite feature. What you pay is what you get. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The Houston Texans are up at pick number 25. They could go a number of ways here, and you could help protect C.J. Stroud. You could get him some more weapons, or you could help get him the ball more often by strengthening the defensive side of the ball. John Hickman going to make the pick, and Locked On Texans almost ready to make that selection. Keith, I want to go to you. What do you like for the Texans here? Are there any glaring best players available that the Texans should run the card up for?
Yeah, you just said something, BP, that I never thought about. And I've done plenty of mock drafts and never made this pairing, and that is getting them a wide receiver, right? And on my board, the next most reliable guy out of this class would be Emeka Egbuka, and I've never thought about it in that capacity, but I think it's a good fit, right? You're talking about towards the back end of the first round. They lost Stephon Diggs. Nico Collins is the clear one. They have other pieces there as far as Xavier Hutchinson and John Mechie. I think Emeka is actually kind of almost a seamless fit for him. And you talk about the familiarity, right? C.J. Stroud, Ohio State, Emeka Egbuka, Ohio State. You can plug and play him right away and let him kind of dominate that slot role and also be a movement piece. I've never thought about it, but you saying weapon, I kind of thought about Emeka Egbuka being the wide receiver that's left on the board.
Well, don't pat me on the back too quickly, because I could be extremely off in that. Damian, who do you like here for the Texans?
You talked about, I do like Emeka Egbuka. They could look to draft the offensive lineman, right? You signed Cam Robinson, who played for the Jacksonville Jaguars, to be your left tackle. I don't think anyone believes that's going to be the long-term answer there after trading or getting rid of Laramie Tunsil. They could look to grab another young guy. I know that they believe in the right tackle, Blake Fisher, that they drafted last year. They believe in him developing. The interior offensive line is solid with Titus Howard and I think Juice Scruggs and those guys. But that left tackle spot is still kind of a worry for me. And C.J. Stroud was under a lot of pressure last year.
You know, Matt, Simmons
I'm a little shocked that there's three tackles, Banks, Simmons, Connerly. Those guys don't last in the real world, and it might be time to grab Simmons, who, even if he's not ready for week one, you sign Cam Robinson, it might pay off huge down the road. But I would go to one of the Ohio State dudes, either Egbuka or Simmons.
Yeah, Simmons on tape is maybe the best tackle. He's got the injury problem, but Kelvin Banks usually doesn't make it this far. It's rare that you see him available at pick 25. So let's find out if that's the direction John Hickman goes. The host of Locked On Texans ready to go with pick number 25.
With the 25th selection in the 2025 Locked On NFL Mock Draft, the Houston Texans select Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver from Ohio State. Why? Because Houston needs talent in their wide receiver room. They lost out on Stephon Diggs in the offseason. He's in New England. Tank Dell will be nursing his injury that he suffered near at the end of last season. And Houston needs to bring in a player that can come in and potentially be the wide receiver 2 day one. That's what Emeka brings. And also look at the familiarity that he shares with quarterback C.J. Stroud. His best year in college catching passes from CJ. So why not bring a familiar face to a player that needs those weapons, not only on the outside, but wherever Houston can play him on that field. And also looking at Christian Kirk, who was traded for in the offseason, that allows for his expectations to be more realistic for the Houston Texans. He doesn't have to be the savior, which is not what they're counting on, but adding Emeka makes it easy for the Houston Texans to have weapons across that field that CJ Stroud can dink and dunk to when he needs to.
And it is Ohio State, and it is wide receiver Emeka Egbuka. Matt, what do you think about the argument? And fan bases go through this every single draft. It feels like they want to help their quarterback, but then they argue about, do you help him by protecting him? And a good quarterback can make his own wide receivers, or do you get someone who can help him play up and get a playmaker to catch the ball and not worry as much about the offensive line?
I do like the Egbuka pickup. I mean, very, very reliable. I don't trust Tank Dell at all from a health perspective. He probably doesn't play at all this year. Yeah, the Ohio State connection is wonderful. I hope with their few other picks, and they did accumulate some with the Tunsil trade, obviously, I would attack the offensive line from here going forward. But this is a solid pickup.
Yeah, I initially was kind of split, and I was almost leaning towards Matt with the potentially going with offensive tackle, right, with this pick. But looking back on it and remembering the Tank Dell injury, I think this is probably your primary need, right? Like, you need pass catchers because a wide receiver core that was one of the best in the NFL with a departure and an injury has quickly become one of the more dire wide receiver rooms across the NFL.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have Nico Collins. They got John Mechie, Xavier Hutchinson. They got some young guys in there.
They do have Christian Kirk. We should have mentioned that. And they did.
Christian Kirk as well.
Kirk, but still,
I think with the new OC, they change it at OC. They got to get a guy that they can feel comfortable with now to be the true number 2 to Nico Collins. And like Matt talked about, the injury to Tank Dell, who I love this game, but he's been injured 2 years in a row since coming into the league. I think Emeka Egbuka makes a lot of sense.
Guys, we have a trade. We finally have a trade. The first
there we go.
In the 2025 Locked On NFL mock draft, and it is probably the right type of team that is always active, and that is the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles are coming up here with the Los Angeles Rams from pick number 32 to pick number 26, and it looks like the Eagles are going to give up pick 96. So late third round pick to come up from 32 to pick 26. And if I know Howie Roseman, and if the guys
mean one thing,
yeah, it's probably a high trades defensive lineman, maybe
some size, shape, or form. It's got to be a D lineman of some sort.
Could it possibly be one from Georgia? Because I look at this thing and, I could potentially see them getting in front of a future need on the offensive line as well and keep a strength to strength. They've been a team that's been built in the trenches on both sides of the football. So there are some offensive linemen worthy of this pick, but there's some defensive linemen that have huge traits. Mykell Williams out of Georgia is somebody that I don't think you can get 6'5", 270 with athleticism, high floor and high upside this late in the NFL draft. This is really where the strengths of this draft starts to shine. And then Shemar Stewart, I know the production hasn't been there, but he is one of the most explosive linemen I've ever seen, jumping off the line of scrimmage if he could just learn how to finish. And I can see a defensive line coach in the NFL thinking that they can teach him how to finish with his get off. So guys, what do you see?
BP, I got to jump in here because I've made this joke on our show a couple times. Like, if Shemar Stewart gets drafted by the Falcons, he may not have a sack in his NFL career.
Right.
But if he goes to the Eagles, he might turn into Reggie White.
That's the way he goes, right? Damian, Keith, what do you think, guys? Do you see something that's glaring? Do you see a player that you would be moving up for if you're the Philadelphia Eagles?
Yeah, so me personally, no. But if I'm the GM and I'm sitting there, I move up for Mykell Williams, right? I mean, I just won a Super Bowl. I rub it in, right? Even if I'm not in love with him, I rub it in a little bit more. Everybody made a couple jokes about me drafting all these Georgia guys. I won a Super Bowl. I do it just to do it at this point, right? So I go Mykell Williams right here.
I think this is a team. The Eagles are a team that's proven that, hey, we'll take the high upside traitsy guy and we'll get them where we need to get them, right? Nolan Smith down the backstretch last year, 6.5 sacks. He was kind of on the tear during the playoff run and in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl. Yeah, I can see them moving up and getting them another toolsy. I'm not it's SEC all the way. If they go edge, it's an SEC guy with a lot of traits, arm length, and strength to put at this edge rush spot. You lost Josh Sweat. Brandon Graham retired. They do have a need to fill. I think they're going edge.
Let's find out. The pick is in. Who did the Eagles go up to get? Locked On Eagles, pick 26 now in the Locked On NFL Mock Draft Special.
With the 26th overall pick in the 2025 Locked On NFL Mock Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select Georgia edge rusher Mykell Williams. Howie Roseman does it again. You can't keep letting him get away with it. A Georgia defensive prospect slips down the board. Howie moves up, trading a third-round pick and a fourth-rounder to the Los Angeles Rams, who moved down to the 32nd overall selection. Mykell Williams makes so much sense. Drafting Georgia players has helped this defense every single year since 2022. Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Keely Ringo. They signed Azeez Ojulari from Georgia in free agency. Continue that theme on defense, and Williams is exactly what this defensive line lost in Josh Sweat. Size, power, run defense, wingspan. He's not the finished product yet of a pass rusher that Josh Sweat is, but bet on the traits, bet on the school, continue to go with upside as Howie Roseman has the last 3 to 4 drafts. It has paid off dividends, and I think it will again with Mykell Williams.
Mykell Williams, defensive end from Georgia, 6'5", 270, 35-inch arm length. He's got some production. I mean, this is a guy who walked onto campus as a true freshman for a stacked national championship Georgia roster and collected 4.5 sacks and continued to be productive and played through injury his final year there. Still only 20 years old, one of the youngest prospects in the draft. There's a high floor there as a run defender. I think could benefit from playing a true edge position instead of inside like he did half the time at the University of Georgia. And he's a player for me that the more you watch him, the more you start to like him. He doesn't quite have as many flash plays as some other prospects, but then you start to see the traits and then you start to watch him and you realize, man, this guy does have quite a bit of upside as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. The upside is tremendous with him. Like you said, you talked about the traits and you're talking about having time to sit there and develop those things. And I think we talked pre-pick, right? Giving him the opportunity just to play true edge because you have those big defensive tackles in Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, I think is going to turn huge dividends for him. So great pick. I think that, you know, the GM, he put himself in position to be able to make this pick by filling out the offense, right? Not many needs offensively. And then defensively, you could just add a position with premier upside.
Damian, would you feel comfortable kicking him inside next to Jalen Carter right away? You know, I would assume so. Yeah.
I was thinking that same thing, Matt,
down.
simply because
right. Yeah.
You lost Milton Williams, right? He got a big contract to the New England Patriots. And you know, Louis talked about they have Azeez Ojulari. They drafted Jalen Hunt last year. They have Bryce Huff. They had and Nolan Smith. They have like four guys off the edge that they can feel comfortable with. Where for Mykell, there's not a lot of pressure to come in and be a 12-sack guy and save this pass rush. This isn't like you said, man. If he goes to Atlanta, the pressure is you got to get us from being the bottom of the pass rush rankings to get us middle of the pack. He doesn't have to do that. And I do think that if you wanted to kick him down at 6'5", 270. Replace Milton Williams on some third downs, I think that you can get a lot of value out of that.
I certainly think he could go inside on some third downs, but I actually think that hamstrung him a little bit. He's a rangy athlete and he can actually have some closing burst as well. I think he would benefit more from being on the outside more, and you would allow him to see his length work on the outside. So I'm interested to see what Mykell looks like on an NFL roster and how he's used and how he develops. And Matt, I also got to say props to Louis DiBiase, the host of Locked On Eagles, for just putting himself in Howie Roseman's shoes. I think he does a good job of playing that role in this mock draft, moving up and getting the type of player he did.
I also want to mention from a Rams perspective that I didn't see an obvious, unless you're going to grab Jackson Dart and let him learn from Stafford. I thought corner was their next biggest need, and I didn't think there was one that was light years above everybody else. So move back, get some picks, and adds up, you know?
Yeah.
And the other thing with the Rams is first of all, they love collecting mid-round picks. So
they're great at it, yeah.
That the Rams really do. So when you're talking about putting yourself in a GM's shoes. And the other thing is there's so many offensive tackles that are still on the board that probably allowed them to feel like they would be comfortable getting one of those if in fact that's what they're looking to do at pick number 32. So let's move along here to the next selection in this draft. That brings us to the Baltimore Ravens at pick number 27. Kevin Ostreicher standing by. What do the Ravens do here, Matt? Do you like a certain player, a certain position for the Baltimore Ravens at this point in the draft? There's still quite a few players at quite a few positions that one of these really good playoff teams is going to be able to grab late in the first round.
They manufacture pass rush well, through scheme and blitz, etc. Maybe Williams would have been a target for them. They did take Owe, who was a traits, not production guy. Would they do the same thing for Stewart? I think guard is their biggest weakness, but I think Booker's more the fit than Zabel for that team, especially with the Bama connections. He's already off the board. They're the type of team that'll take Linderbaum or Hamilton just with no regard for position value, just best player on the board. Maybe they grab Emmanwori, another corner to go with Wiggins long-term makes some sense as well.
Yeah, I was looking at the corner. Corners. They only have 4 on the roster.
Yeah,
they only have 4. They got 4 corners on the roster. Like, you kind of need to fix that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if somebody goes down, now you got to deal with a backup going against Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I don't think that's a good idea. You might want to go ahead and add some more depth to this room. But I do think that Emmanwori could, because I think Marcus Williams was their other starting safety. They lost Geno Stone to Cincinnati last offseason. It is a position. I mean, thinking about Kyle Hamilton lined up side by side with Nick Emmanwori seems kind of cheating in a sense.
That would be a lot of size and athleticism in the middle of the football field for the Baltimore Ravens. The pick is in, pick number 27. Kevin Ostreicher ready to go for Locked On Ravens.
But the 27th selection in the 2025 Locked On NFL Mock Draft, the Baltimore Ravens select Nick Emmanwori, safety, South Carolina. Emmanwori put together one of the best combines we have ever seen out of a player of his size, and he has an incredible blend of size and speed that could really help take Baltimore's defense to the next level. It's Zach Orr's second season as Baltimore's defensive coordinator, and a player with the versatility that Nick Emmanwori has would be incredible for him. Now, the Ravens have put themselves in a position to draft best player available instead of need. There are a lot of ways this pick could go, but if Emmanwori falls to 27, he would absolutely constitute the best player available. And even though safety is not the Ravens' biggest need, with them having Kyle Hamilton already in the fold, a lot of teams are looking for that next Kyle Hamilton, and Emmanwori, who a lot of people are saying are a more athletic version of what Hamilton was when he first came out of Notre Dame, would give the Ravens the best safety duo in the entire NFL.
So I have a couple of questions here. Keith, who plays center field out of those two players? And does the player on the field match the combine performance for Nick Emmanwori?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with this, BP, is that if you have two low hole safeties, then who's the high hole guy, right? And I think that was what becomes kind of somewhat of the issue. I don't know if it becomes redundant skill sets for the Baltimore Ravens. I would say you have to put Kyle Hamilton at the free. And I know he doesn't have the speed, but I have to be completely honest. Watching Nick, I see most of his plays made close to the line of scrimmage too. So this one for me is more of a head scratching, not from the selection, but because of what's on the roster. I'm trying to have these pieces and putting the pieces to the puzzle together. They kind of bump against each other some.
Yeah, I mean, going into their bye, they had so many coverage issues, and then they took Hamilton, put him in the deep middle, and that helped erase their problems. The defense took a massive step forward. But I think if you take a safety, you wanted to do it to free up Hamilton to do all the other stuff, and this move doesn't do that,
Yeah, I think for them, it's going to be a situation where, defensive coordinator Zach Orr has to really put on that creative hat. And it's like, okay, which one of these guys where do I put both of them, right? I think especially with the influx of two high safety looks, you can get that out of them. But they also have a guy that I forgot about. Darius Washington was really good for them in coverage. And he has the ability to play the nickel and the free. So then you can free up one of the other guys to be that big nickel, big dime and play in the box. So they have enough pieces to where you can mix and match coverages based off of what you're dealing with offensively.
Well, now that we have one trade, will there be more on the way? The Detroit Lions are on the clock at 28 for now in the 2025 Locked On NFL Mock Draft Special. This episode of the Locked On NFL Mock Draft Special is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, You need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. If it was just that easy for NFL teams to find the exact right candidate for all the positions they're trying to fill. And when you post your job, LinkedIn's new features can help write job descriptions, quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: add the hiring frame, the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Let's see where Matt Derry goes. He's the host of Locked On Lions, maybe fielding some calls. Teams getting a little itchy here at the end of round one, moving around a little bit. I like that. As it pertains to the Locked On Lions and the Detroit Lions roster as of now, Matt, where do you like the Lions going here at pick number 28 at this portion of the draft?
So anyone that's ever on the internet sees an edge rusher going here opposite Hutchinson, and I got no problem with that. They have leads. You bring out the pass rush and you finish them off in the dome, in a loud dome. Great. But outside of maybe Philadelphia, nobody values the offensive line more than Detroit. And Decker's getting up in age. They lost Zeitler at guard, and they're going to replace him with questionable replacements. You could groom Connerly to get stronger. You could wait on Simmons. You could go with Zabel, or Banks still be in there. Kind of blows me away too.
Yeah, Banks can start inside, then move outside eventually.
Yeah.
Well. So a lot of options there if they wanted to go really to either side of the line. Guys, what do you think, Keith? What side of the line would you go to?
Yeah, I would go edge rusher. And listen, Peter didn't want my guy, but I mentioned Donovan Iziriku again, right? I think he's a naturally gifted guy that would step right in and be a nice complementary piece to Aiden Hutchinson, because even when Aiden is there and fully healthy, right? Usually having a 1-2 punch is what gets you over the top, right? Not just having one guy. So the Lions, that's their dire need. And even in the past, their general manager has always he's evaluated their roster well and said, hey, what do we need regardless of position, and then let me go fill it. Last year it was corners. They went and got 2 in their first 3 picks, I believe. So I look at this, I say Donovan Iziriku, get yourself a pass rusher, get you somebody opposite of Aiden.
It looks like a stick and pick for the Detroit Lions at number 28. Matt Derry ready to go. The pick is in for Locked On Lions.
With the 28th selection in the 2025 Locked On NFL Mock Draft, the Detroit Lions select Shemar Stewart, edge, Texas A&M. You look at Stewart's character, the way he's built, his size, his speed, his ability to get to the passer. You got to think Brad Holmes at number 28 here gets this edge rusher from A&M, a guy whose numbers weren't great in college, but freak athlete and a kid that can really get to the quarterback and do some damage, certainly in a position that the Lions need. Now, there were some other guys in consideration for this 28th pick that are right there with Stewart in my mind for the Lions. Nick Scorton, his teammate at A&M, and Donovan Eziraku, an edge rusher from Boston College. I think the Lions would consider both of those guys, but we're taking Stewart here because of the need, certainly, and the fact that he's got a big body, can play inside and outside on that defensive line, something the Lions love. They love versatility along the defensive line. I think that this is the route they're going to go at 28, and this is how the draft, at least this mock draft, falls for us and Detroit at number 28. I
actually really like this pick for the Detroit Lions at 28. Shemar Stewart, he makes me very nervous when you're talking about a top 10 pick, and when you see a guy who's 6'4", 6'5", 200, played at 280 pounds down to 267, that runs a 4.59, has this explosive ability. It gets you excited, and I could see why a team would jump on him early. But when you start to get down the board here and picking him a little bit later, I start to like that pick a little bit more, because there is some floor, Damian, right, to him being a decent run defender. And man, if you could just teach him to finish somehow, get a little better at the top of the rush, you might really have something in a couple of years that could be the best player in the entire draft, really, with his explosive ability.
100%, BP. I always say this: pressures are sacks not converted. And he had 33 pressures on the season last year. On true dropback sets, he had a pass rush win rate of like 22%. And this is a guy that at times, I'm not gonna lie, watching this film, he was just an unlucky guy because sometimes the quarterback just got the ball out of his hands quick before he could finish his rep. And like he won, but it was like the ball's gone. I think going to Detroit, and I think that Detroit should probably still bring back Zadarius Smith to kind of be that guy, especially while you're trying to work Aiden Hutchinson back in. He can also mentor this young freak athlete and teach him how to clear the shoulder quicker, how to your hand placement, all those type of things. But his ceiling is immense, and I'm gonna just trust the Detroit Lions, who've made. I don't think they've missed on any of their early picks yet. I think they've been nailing most of them. I'm gonna trust them here that they can get the best out of Shemar Stewart.
Matt, when it comes to comps for Shemar Stewart, a lot of people bring up Donnell Hunter as a freakishly athletic guy who developed in the NFL. And my response to that is always, well, okay, if you give me Shemar Stewart in the third round,
sign me up.
Right. Go. Sign me up, right? Yeah. So it does get a little bit more pricey when you're drafting him in the first round and expecting that development.
Yeah, but to these guys' point too, and you mentioned it as soon as they made the pick, for a well-established team late in the first round with Super Bowl aspirations, that's a lot different than throwing them in Atlanta and say, change our pass rush. It's been a nightmare for 2 decades, you know?
Yeah, and it's not like they were passing on a bunch of other guys to draft him. A lot of the other guys already went first, except for your guy, Keith.
BC guy, right?
Mentioned, though, as a Rocco, at least he mentioned his name, but decided to go with the Toolsy upside swing. We are catching up again with our guys, the draft dudes. In fact, they're not just guys; they are guys being dudes, and that is the draft dudes. Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs from Locked On NFL Scouting for their insight on this episode's selection.
I feel like you go into any draft and you wonder, where do the safeties go, right? Where do the safeties go? Well, the answer is they go in this patch of picks. And it actually does highlight one of my favorite picks from this group, and that's the Vikings at 24. Picking Malaki Starks, the safety out of Georgia, one of my favorite prospects in the class. And I think he just makes so much for Minnesota based on that Brian Flores defense wanting to be very blitz aggressive and pressure heavy. You want to have a one-high center fielder that can really be that ball hawk in the middle of the field. And I think Malaki Starks certainly provides that. So you start getting these throws that are heated up. You got a guy like Starks that can go make crazy plays on the ball. You know, Harrison Smith not getting any younger. I feel like this is one of my favorite value selections of the first round.
I'm glad that you mentioned value because I look at every single one of these picks. This might be my favorite block of value in the first round altogether. And you consider Derrick Harmon going to Green Bay. I think that's a great fit for a player who's a little under the radar relative to some of the other defensive tackles in this class. And Malaki Starks, as you mentioned, and the Eagles coming up for Mykell Williams and Nick Emmanwori going to the Baltimore Ravens to pair with Kyle Hamilton. What a dynamic duo that is. And then Shemar Stewart to the Detroit Lions with big-time athletic potential. They need long-term running mate opposite Aiden Hutchinson. Where he ultimately ends up playing weight-wise will be interesting because playing at a bigger mass at Texas A&M. But that's a brand of football kind of player that I think really makes sense for Detroit as well. So I love the value here from top to bottom for all of these picks in this stretch of the draft. But combining Nick Emmanwori with Kyle Hamilton feels like a cruel joke on the rest of the league for the amount of space that those guys can cover in the underneath areas of the field, and creates a lot of mismatches and a lot of size profiles that's going to make it really difficult for you to capture the edges on this defense because these safeties coming down in support with how big, long, and explosive they are. What skill guys are you reliably going to ask to block these guys in space? It's really tall task for one of them, let alone to have two.
And BP, I apologize, but that gave me an idea. Yeah, I mean, Krabs with a Marino jersey over his shoulder, talking to Marino. I'm going to send you a Zion Williamson jersey to hang in your studio so we can. That's a good married couple right there.
Absolutely. I'm going to send you a jersey of former Los Angeles Rams receiver Elvis Peacock.
Okay, I was thinking about that. I didn't have any of that. And none handy.
Folks used to ask my grandpa, they're like, hey, you related to Elvis Peacock? He's like, have you seen Elvis Peacock and seen me? I don't think we're related, guys.
Yeah. Me and Zion are not either, well, if you can believe it or not.
Look, you could probably
a Sanchez jersey behind Damien right now would look good.
Go, baby. Right. There you go. There you go. We've only had one trade so far, but Locked On NFL host Tony Wiggins is hearing that some prospects Wig putting in work as our insider, by the way, in this mock draft. He's hearing that some prospects that are still on the board are causing some trade talks at the end of the first round.
I'm really thinking that the only reason a team would move up is if they see a person or a player they like at a critical position and they want that fifth-year option, right? Second-round picks, they sign through 4 years. First-round picks, it's 4 years, but you have a little bit of time before that fourth season starts, between the end of the third year and year 4, to get up and get that fifth-year option. And normally it's at critical positions, right? So the tackle that I still see on the board is Ariante Ursary, kid out of Minnesota. Maybe some teams don't like him as a first-round pick, but there's somebody that's willing to trade up and saying, you know what, we'll need the extra time to develop him. Jackson Dart is the third quarterback that I'm looking at. And the team at the top of the current draft that did not get a quarterback was the New York Giants. Is this where they come up into the end of the first round? What about Tyleik Williams? The reason why I say Tyleik Williams, the nose tackle out of Ohio State, is because the big fish at that spot is gone, right? That's Kenneth Grant. Maybe there's not another one until you get to Jamari Caldwell after Tyleik Williams. Maybe somebody wants to say, you know what, let me come up at the end of this draft. Someone like Philly, maybe Jalen Carter can go play his true position at 3 technique. But that's something else that these teams have to ponder and have to consider right now. The Patriots sitting there with these offensive line problems, they went with Travis Hunter, but think about it like this. They too can get some help when it comes to on the offensive line. What about Donovan Jackson, a guy with the versatility to play both left tackle as well as left guard? And we all know New England needs as much as they can get in the first round.
I like where Wiggs' head's at with a couple of things there. One, with the Patriots, with the opportunity now with some offensive linemen falling to maybe go back up and get the guy that maybe they would have drafted, say, at number 4 if he was healthy, and Josh Simmons or Banks, who's still there, and being able to go BPA at number 4 overall and then still getting potentially a franchise left tackle for your football team. That would be a phenomenal draft for the New England Patriots. And I'm glad he brought up Tyleik Williams, because I've said this to you, Matt, and I'll say it again here. I think there's no prospect in this NFL draft that could single-handedly help a team's run defense more than Tyleik Williams. And so he would be a phenomenal player for someone to draft here late in round 1 or early in round 2. We've got pick 29 on next episode of the Locked On NFL Mock Draft Special, and it is the Washington Commanders. We've got the Bills, we've got the Kansas City Chiefs, and we've got the Los Angeles Rams with the 32nd pick currently, but I know there is some trade winds of blowing in the final episode of the 2025 Locked On NFL Mock Draft. And don't forget, you can find the entire special on both audio and video at the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, Locked On NFL Draft, and Locked On NFL podcast feeds for Matt Williamson, Damian Parson, and Keith Sanchez. I'm Brian Peacock. We'll see you for the rest of the top 10 in the next episode of the Locked On NFL Mock Draft Special, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.